This is lesson 21.1, the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars. How was peace restored and maintained after the year 1815? College Board topic 5.7, the Congress of Vienna. Explain how states responded to Napoleonic rule in Europe and the consequences of the response. After the defeat of Napoleon by a coalition of European powers, the Congress of Vienna, 1814-1815, attempted to restore the balance of power in Europe and contain the danger of revolutionary or nationalistic upheavals in the future. And we've got College Board topic 6.5, the concert of Europe and European conservatism. Explain how the European political order was maintained and challenged from 1815 to 1914. Conservatives developed a new ideology in support of the traditional political and religious authorities, which was based on the idea that human nature was not perfectible. And the Concert of Europe, or the Congress system, sought to maintain the status quo through collective action and adherence to conservatism. Then we got College Board topic 6.6, reactions and revolutions. Explain how and why various groups reacted against the existing order from 1815 to 1914. In the first half of the 19th century, revolutionaries attempted to destroy the status quo. And we're going to see that happen in Russia in particular as an example. Places, we are all over Europe today, especially Vienna, France, Spain, the Italian Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and Russia. Time frame, 1814 to about 1850. Key concepts of the Congress of Vienna. Well, of course, we've got the Congress of Vienna. We've got the Holy Alliance. We've got the Quadruple Alliance, the Congress system, and the Karlsbad Decrees. One of the things that's not on here is something that's very akin to the Congress system, and that's the concert of Europe. People of the Congress of Vienna: Prince Klemens von Metternich, Louis XVIII, Alexander I, Nicholas I, and Charles Talleyrand. So the Congress of Vienna, what was it? It was a huge summit of kings, emperors, ministers, diplomats from all over Europe. The main players were the Quadruple Alliance that had beaten France, Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, and it involved many other smaller states and religious institutions. It lasted 9 months, like a school year, from September 1814 to June 1815, and it was way more than just formal diplomatic meetings. It was a 9-month-long celebration of the end of 25 years of revolution and war. There were cocktail parties and dinner parties and ballroom dances and theatrical productions and parades and fireworks, etc. These informal settings were where a huge amount of diplomatic work was actually done. Negotiation, information gathering, compromise, diplomacy, spying, etc. In fact, the Pope permitted his bishops to dance at the balls because it was so important to exchange information and negotiate while dancing. There was also considerable pillow talk through highly influential mistresses where important diplomatic transactions took place. This was the first time that the international media was involved. You had newspapers and periodicals and editorials and political cartoons all closely covering what was going on. Prince Klemens von Metternich, 1773 to 1859. He was a German noble. He was given the title Prince in 1813 as a reward for his service to the Austrian Empire, and he was the foreign minister of Austria. He liked to call himself the chief minister of police in Europe, and he also saw himself as what he called the coachman of Europe, driving the Congress forward. The Congress of Vienna was his baby. He set the tone and the agenda, and he defined the goals. Klemens von Metternich was very conservative. He believed in landed aristocracy. He believed in monarchy. He was deeply religious, Catholic, and he believed in restoring what had been lost. The main goals of the Congress of Vienna: number 1, restore the balance of power. Number 2, restore legitimate monarchies wherever Napoleon had taken them away. Number 3, provide compensation to the victors. And number 4, install mechanisms to ensure the peace in the future. The amazing thing about the Congress of Vienna was this: statesmanship triumphed over competing agendas over and over again. And the Congress of Vienna created at least 30 years of peace. It was decided early not to treat France harshly. The Congress of Vienna could have demonized and punished France. Instead, they gave France a place in the negotiations. This was a collective decision. The Bourbon family were seen as victims of the French Revolution, so why punish them? And France was treated as part of the fraternity of monarchies. French Foreign Minister Charles Talleyrand was a veteran diplomat with a lot of respect. He was also the priest, if you'll remember, who had been in favor of civil constitution of the clergy back in lesson 1906. The First Treaty of Paris specified several important things. Number one, it restored France back to its 1792 borders. No more of these natural frontiers that Anacharsis Claude talked about. Number two, there would be no war reparations charged against France. Number three, there would be no spirit of revenge against France. And number four, there would be no carving France up. All of these things would avoid a lot of bad blood later. Louis XVIII was placed on the French throne. He was actually Louis Stanislaus Xavier, Louis XVI's younger brother, not his son. So why did the French throne pass from Louis XVI to Louis XVIII, and who was Louis XVII? Well, Louis XVII was the title given to Louis XVI's 8-year-old son, Louis Charles. And he lived for 2.5 years at the prison until he died, apparently of a neck infection called scrofulous. He spent much of that time in extreme confinement. He had numerous, quote, caretakers assigned to him during that time who would visit him in the prison. Claims that they abused him can't actually be proven. But when he died, his body was found to be covered with scars, indicating severe physical abuse. Advice was given to Louis XVIII, this new king of France. One of the things he was told was this: don't use your throne to take revenge on those who had harmed your family. And try to control your supporters who want to take revenge of their own. You're not going to completely stop them, but do try to control them. Number three, don't try to turn back the clock. France was now a constitutional monarchy. There would be no going back to an absolute monarchy. The Congress of Vienna, also known as the Congress system, would work to ensure the stability of Louis XVIII's throne. Big goal number one of the Congress of Vienna: restore the balance of power in Europe. Now, much of that meant a strong defense against France. Like we said, no action would be taken against France, no spirit of revenge, but the reality was this: France was a very large and powerful country. Therefore, you had to set up some borders around France to seal it in. For example, combine Belgium and the Netherlands to form the Kingdom of the Netherlands to the north. That would be much stronger. Also, returned seized territory on the Rhine to Prussia to the northeast, and form a German confederation to the east of France. And instead of comprising 300 weak little principalities, it would have 39 much stronger German states. What about the balance of power among the victors? There had to be compensation for the huge cost of life and treasure that the winners of this war had paid in defeating Napoleon. France couldn't possibly repay that much money. So instead of money, the victors were to be compensated with territory. Now, Britain already had won a huge amount of territory overseas from France, so Britain had received its satisfaction in this area. Austria got Lombardy, Venetia, France's Polish possessions, and the east coast of the Adriatic. But they also had to give up a couple of things. For example, Austria had to give up Belgium so that that new, more powerful Kingdom of the Netherlands could be created to the north of France. They also had to give up southern Germany. But do you notice something that's going on here? Something that's happening to the people that live in these areas? Russia got to keep a reduced Polish kingdom, and Prussia got some of the state of Saxony. Even Napoleon got something. He got to keep his title. He got to rule the island of Elba off the Italian coast. There's a map right there. He also got an allowance of 2 million francs per year. Then there was a big interruption. Napoleon broke out of Elba in February 1815 and took over France again from February to June. The Quadruple Alliance had to defeat him again in a huge bloodbath at Waterloo on June 18, 1815. In the Second Treaty of Paris, because the first one hadn't worked out that well because they'd been too lenient with Napoleon, France would still be treated leniently, but Napoleon was exiled to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, and the Allies put an occupational army in France for the next 5 years. And France would have to pay for that army. They weren't going to have to pay war reparations, but they were going to have to pay for this army. This is where the island of St. Helena is, and so Napoleon, it's not likely that he's going to be getting off that island anytime soon, and he never did. The Congress would hold regular meetings, and they created the Congress system, and this was all part of an overall spirit of cooperation, which we often call the Concert of Europe. And this settled many disputes diplomatically over the next several decades. Major decisions of the Congress of Vienna. Nationalist feelings were to be ignored. If you were part of an ethnic group in the Austrian Empire, you weren't getting your own country. Napoleon himself was largely responsible for fostering these feelings of nationalism with his invasions. Ecclesiastical, in other words, church-owned principalities, were amalgamated into secular states. These were regions that had previously been under the control of the Catholic Church. The Pope was, of course, furious at this, but nobody cared, even though most of the diplomats involved were devout Catholics. The Congress of Vienna also recognized that some of the things Napoleon had put in place were actually good. For example, Napoleon had destroyed the Holy Roman Empire, and the consensus was, let's just let that one stay destroyed. Napoleon had abolished serfdom wherever he had gone, and the Congress said, let's not put the people that Napoleon freed back into serfdom. The Napoleonic Code was retained in many places. It had proven to be a highly effective and useful system, and it had had a centralizing effect on Europe. Let's take a look at the mind of this coachman of Europe, this leader of the Congress of Vienna, this chief of police of Europe, Klemens von Metternich. Metternich wanted a world of nobles and kings. He supported the authority of the landed aristocracy, and he hated anything that implied reform or revolution. Metternich allied with the other three powers for the purpose of confronting revolution wherever it might rear its ugly head, and this would ensure that there would be peace. He wanted to police Europe, particularly the French, and particularly Napoleon's family members, of which there were many. Prince Klemens von Metternich and liberalism. Metternich was not for any ideology that was trying to guarantee fundamental rights, the right of identity, the right of property. Liberalism was a dangerous idea in his mind. These things were not rights, but rather gifts that a ruler might choose to bestow upon you under certain circumstances. Prince Klemens von Metternich and nationalism. Metternich considered nationalism to be very dangerous. Why? Some empires were multi-ethnic conglomerates, like Metternich's country, Austria. There were at least 11 different languages in Austria. Different ethnic groups lived in the same provinces, even in the same villages. Landlords were often a completely different ethnicity from their peasants. And we saw the origins of this way back in Lesson 11.5. Russia and the Ottoman Empire had similar situations. Nationalism had the potential to destabilize these conglomerate countries and tear them apart. Prince Klemens von Metternich and democracy. Everybody loves democracy, right? Who doesn't think democracy is great? The idea that there should be some kind of an instrument by which citizens should play an active role in politics? That crazy idea had caused the horrors of the French Revolution in Metternich's mind. Voting and constitutions were seen as the very stuff of revolution. Prince Klemens von Metternich and freedom of speech. People don't need freedom of speech. People have no right to it. People should be happy with whatever we choose to grant them. What would these people with free speech talk about? What would they do with their free speech? Here's what they would do. They would blaspheme, and they would speak against their king, and they would demand rights. People don't need free speech. Prince Klemens von Metternich and the right of assembly. If you let these people get together, what are you going to have? Soon you're going to have political clubs, and then you're going to have a national convention like the French got, and then you're going to have a reign of terror, and who wants that? Prince Klemens von Metternich and inalienable rights. These were products of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment had cast Europe into war and revolution. Who needs that? So the Congress of Vienna had a distinct conservative chill to it. There was no allowance made for dissent. There was no discussion of a constitution. There was no discussion of the right to vote. There was no discussion of social mobility. There was no discussion of the current economic and social forces that were rapidly changing Europe. There was no discussion of the new classes that were being created by the Industrial Revolution. In fact, the term Industrial Revolution was still at least 15 years away. The Congress of Vienna was powerfully reinforced by religion. The idea of union of throne and altar was strong, and this was the idea that conservatives needed the moral authority found in the church in order to fight these revolutions. The pulpit plus the police station equals enormous control. The new age of faith actually comes out of the Congress of Vienna. The Holy Alliance. The Holy Alliance was formed kind of at the tail end of the Congress of Vienna. It had been 9 long months. Everybody was tired. Everybody was ready to go home. And people were willing at that point to agree to anything just to finish this thing. The Holy Alliance was the brainchild of Tsar Alexander I, who lived from 1777 to 1825. He was a religious mystic. He thought he had the ear of God. He was generally understood to be losing his sanity, and he may have even faked his own death in 1825. Conservative and religious Metternich enthusiastically signed Austria onto this Holy Alliance idea. Prussia also joined. Great Britain actually declined, the last member of the Quadruple Alliance. It didn't want anything to do with this Holy Alliance. It all seemed too corny to Anglican Britain. The Holy Alliance said this: Christianity will shape all dealings within this new, so far untested Congress system, also known as the Concert of Europe. And it would work to suppress all things such as liberalism and revolution and secularism and deism and nationalism, etc. God obviously hates all these things. So the Holy Alliance was fundamentally reactionary and anachronistic. How would all of these dangerous isms be suppressed by the Holy Alliance? What tools did they have? Well, they had such things as censorship, military might, secret police, imprisonment, and executions. The conservatives had won for now with the Congress of Vienna. Revolutionary ideas were associated with war and Napoleon. Conservative ideas were associated with restoration and recovery and stability and solidity and established values and Christian principles. There would be challenges to our thus far untested Congress system. Conservative values represented a world that was rapidly going away. Liberalism, nationalism, and many other isms that we will study were coming. Industrialization was coming. These would be much greater threats to the established order than the French Revolution or Napoleon had ever been. Social and economic pressures were coming. Europe was going through big economic changes. A wealthy middle class was growing through capital and industry. Bankers, lawyers, professionals, factory owners, etc. These people were all calling for more political power. The working class was booming. Both the emerging middle class and the emerging working class would challenge the landed aristocracy for rights and for power. Nationalist feelings meant seething anger and frustration. Poland, Italy, and Germany were all deprived of nationhood. The nationalist hopes of these peoples had not even been considered by the Congress of Vienna. The Congress system, or the Concert of Europe, gets tested. It all began very soon in Germany in the year 1819. In Germany, reformers and university students started calling for a unified German nation that had never existed before. You already had a 39-state German confederation, and they met at the Confederation Diet. Austria and Prussia, through this Confederation Diet, issued the Karlsbad Decrees. Liberal organizations were outlawed under these decrees. All universities and newspapers were policed in these decrees, and the Karlsbad Decrees established an investigatory committee with a network of spies at every university in Germany. Then we have Spain and the Italian kingdom of the Two Sicilies in 1820. These challenges are coming pretty fast now. Revolutionaries in both countries forced their kings to accept constitutional monarchies. The kings were still on their thrones, but that was not good enough for the Holy Alliance, and these constitutions were way too liberal. They contained things like free press and universal male suffrage and other reforms too. Metternich and Alexander I called for a conference, and they declared, quote, active intervention to maintain all autocratic regimes wherever they are threatened. Let's see this declaration at work. Metternich and his conservatives of the Congress feared a kind of domino effect. If one autocratic monarchy goes down, they could all go down. And in 1821, Metternich sent Austrian troops into Italy, and he restored the king of the Two Sicilies as the absolute monarch, and he got rid of that liberal constitution. And in 1823, in the name of active intervention, France invaded Spain. France restored the Spanish king as the absolute monarch, and they got rid of that bothersome liberal constitution. Russia after the Congress of Vienna, the Russian interregnum of 1825, and the Decembrist Revolt. Most people know the most basic things about the Decembrist Revolt, also known as the Decembrist Uprising. There was a revolt in Russia in 1825. It involved soldiers, and Tsar Nicholas I put it down harshly and killed lots of people. But there's a fascinating story surrounding the Decembrist Revolt. And if you know the story, you will remember the Decembrist Revolt so much better. So what is an interregnum? We've already seen one interregnum before with Oliver Cromwell. It's a period between kings, and it's often marked by extreme crisis over the issue of succession. It can put a dynastic house in great danger until the issue is resolved. And the Russian interregnum began on December 1st, 1825, the day that Alexander I died. It lasted 25 days until Nicholas I put down the Decembrist Revolt. It involved the four Romanov brothers and their mom, Maria. Tsar Alexander I was the oldest of the four brothers. The next younger brother, Constantine, was next in line for succession. Alexander I's younger brother, Constantine, was the presumptive heir to the Russian throne. Constantine was the viceroy, the governor, of the partitioned-off Congress Poland, which Russia ruled. See lesson 16.5. Russian history views Constantine as a liberal who was willing to disagree with and even defy the orders of his brother, Alexander I, based on liberal principles. Poland actually had a constitution, which was something Constantine was quite proud of. But Polish history sees Constantine as a cruel despot. Constantine's liberal policies in Poland were viewed as not being liberal enough. As early as 1819, Constantine secretly told his brothers and his mother that he did not want to be the next Tsar of Russia. This is the biggest secret in Russia. Even the highest officials in Russia had absolutely no idea of this situation with Constantine. And if Constantine's wishes were followed, then Nicholas, the next younger brother, would be the next in line. Nobody knew about Constantine's wishes, and Nicholas was very conservative and even reactionary. As inspector of the guards, Nicholas was considered very rude and was extremely unpopular with the troops, and this may be why his future succession was kept secret for years. So the secret manifesto. In the year 1823, Alexander had a secret manifesto drawn up, and he added his signature and sealed it with his official seal. The Metropolitan, kind of like an Archbishop of Moscow, was Filaret Drozdov, and he wrote it. Two of Alexander's closest advisors, Alexander Golitsyn and Alexei Arakayev, were witnesses. 4 authentic copies were made of this manifesto. 1 copy was locked in the sanctuary of the main Orthodox cathedral in Moscow. 3 more were secretly put in the files of the 3 main government institutions in St. Petersburg, the capital. Alexander I's secret manifesto named Nicholas as the heir to the Russian throne instead of Constantine, according to Constantine's wishes. So you had Alexander I, Alexander Golitsyn, Alexei Arakayev, and Filaret Drozdov. These were the only 4 people who knew about this secret document. Alexander's 2 younger brothers, Nicholas and Mikhail, knew of Constantine's wishes not to be emperor. But no one except those 4 people knew that the succession had been specified in writing by Alexander I. Alexander I died on December 1st at a health spa way down on the Sea of Azov. He had been ill for almost 3 months, and Alexander Golitsyn had begged the emperor to make this manifesto public. But the emperor, Alexander I, would not do it. And so news of the death finally reached St. Petersburg on December the 9th. The governor-general of St. Petersburg was Mikhail Mirorovich. He got Alexander I's second youngest brother, Nicholas, to publicly pledge an oath of loyalty to Constantine on that very day. Nobody is sure why Nicholas did this. He was already aware that Constantine didn't want to be czar. Nicholas most likely thought that he was doing what he was supposed to do for the moment. That was the moment that the Empress Dowager Maria said, "What'd you do that for? You're the heir to the throne, not Constantine." In response to that, Governor-General Mikhail Mirorovich told Nicholas, "You can't reign unless the reigning emperor abdicates, and that's Constantine at this moment. Otherwise, you're going to have a civil war. The troops will support Constantine." So Nicholas did not press any kind of claim to the throne in spite of Mom. He didn't want the throne anyway. So this made the Governor-General of St. Petersburg, Mikhail Mirorovich, the temporary dictator of the entire Russian Empire. And Mirorovich had no desire to remain dictator. So Governor-General Mikhail Mirorovich got busy fixing this situation. He instructed military commanders to administer the oath of loyalty to Constantine to their own soldiers. He broke the law twice. He was not supposed to initiate the oath before receiving Constantine's official accession manifest, and he wasn't supposed to administer the oath to the soldiers before the civilian government was sworn in. So Governor-General Mikhail Mirorovich got wind of Alexander I's manifesto that was locked up at the sanctuary of the Moscow Cathedral. And Mirorovich sent his messenger to the governor of Moscow, and he informed the governor that Constantine was the emperor. And Mirorovich ordered the governor of Moscow to swear in the city administration right away. And he informed the governor that a certain packet locked up in the cathedral sanctuary had to remain sealed. Alexander I's close advisor and friend, Alexander Golitsyn, went to an emergency meeting of the government's state council, and he revealed the existence of another copy of Alexander I's manifesto, which was on file in secret right there at the state council. So now the question was, what was more legally binding, Alexander's signed and sealed official manifest, or Nicholas's public pledge of loyalty to his brother Constantine. Mikhail Mironovich was also at this same meeting, and in this meeting he argued before the State Council that Alexander I's manifesto was being presented as a will, and he argued that there were already laws that governed Russian succession, and the emperor could not nullify those laws with a will. So the members of the State Council, probably about 23, opened the sealed manifest, they read it, and they were just about to discuss it. But then Mikhail Mironovich argued, you can't discuss the manifest because Nicholas has already renounced whatever right to the throne that manifest might have given him by publicly pledging his loyalty to Constantine. And the entire State Council, like I said, probably about 23 men, went into Nicholas's waiting room and asked Nicholas one more time if he wanted the Russian throne, and Nicholas said no. And Nicholas administered the oath of allegiance to the members of the State Council to Constantine right then and there. So it looked like this whole succession crisis was all straightened out. The finance minister even started minting coins with Constantine's face on them. And they summoned Constantine, who was living 720 miles away in Warsaw, to come to St. Petersburg and ascend to the throne. Constantine was serving as viceroy of Russian Poland at the time. Well, Constantine refused to even come to St. Petersburg at all, responding simply that his brother Nicholas was the new emperor. And the family even sent Mikhail, the youngest brother, to Warsaw to try to persuade Constantine to come, but he would not budge. And Mikhail returned to St. Petersburg without his brother Constantine. So by December 24th, Nicholas started getting messages that civil unrest and plots to rebel were building up in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. And the public, the government, and the military were all getting extremely restless and anxious because there was no Constantine and no new emperor. And Nicholas realized that if he didn't claim the throne, he would be killed in a matter of days. The main group that wanted to take advantage of all of this confusion was a political club called the Northern Society. Their leadership consisted of some very high-ranking military officers of noble birth. Their leader was Prince Sergei Trubetskoy. They were inspired by the U.S. Constitution, and they were also inspired by Alexander I's reforms and by Constantine's Polish constitution that he had pushed as viceroy in Russian Poland. Most had wanted a constitutional monarchy in Russia for several years. Some preferred to execute the emperor and establish a republic in Russia. And Nicholas was way too reactionary and autocratic for their liking. So they wanted to stage a revolt and push for a constitution. At midnight on the 26th of December, Nicholas called the State Council and announced 3 things. Number 1, Nicholas was himself the new emperor of Russia as of the date of Alexander's death back on December the 1st. 2, Constantine had never at any time been the emperor. And number 3, Nicholas' own pledge of loyalty to his brother Constantine had been a, quote, misunderstanding. The State Council accepted Nicholas then and there as the new Russian emperor. The next morning on December 26th, and by the way, that is by our calendar, it was very close to the winter solstice, and daylight in St. Petersburg lasted from about 9:04 a.m. to about 2:58 p.m., so less than 6 hours. St. Petersburg is really far to the north. So Nicholas brought together the military commanders and explained the situation to them. He took their oath of loyalty to himself, and he sent them off to administer the oath to their own soldiers. But Nicholas didn't print and distribute copies of his brother Alexander's manifest. The oath of loyalty among the troops was going smoothly until a couple of regiments assembled in formation on Peter's Square in the middle of all the government buildings. They were about 3,000 in number, as opposed to 9,000 loyal troops. This revolt had been organized by the Northern Society, although many of the leaders, including Prince Sergei Trubetskoy, didn't show up. These rebels were to be called the Decembrists. They refused to take the oath, and instead they shouted, "Hurrah for Constantine! Hurrah for Constantine!" And a large mass of civilians was cheering them on. And an increasingly hostile standoff lasted for hours. Numerous attempts at negotiation got nowhere. Our St. Petersburg Governor General McKay, the guy who had worked so hard to get Constantine in place as emperor, went to talk to the Decembrists, and he was shot dead. Nicholas' younger brother, Mikhail, also attempted to negotiate with the rebels. Someone attempted to shoot him as well. And a metropolitan, that's a religious leader, also tried and failed. It was getting dark soon, and the growing crowd was forming a dense circle around Nicholas's troops. And Nicholas was concerned that the civilians would overwhelm his troops in the dark. Some of his troops were defecting to the other side. His men attempted a cavalry charge to scare everybody off of the square and break up the revolt. It failed because the horses kept slipping on the ice. Finally, one of his generals, Karl Wilhelm von Toll, told Nicholas, "Let me clear the square with gunfire, or else you must abdicate." So Nicholas ordered artillery fired into the rebels. The cannons fired canister shot into the crowd, which was canisters filled with gunpowder and golf ball-sized pellets, very deadly. People and soldiers fled in all directions. Many tried to escape on the ice-covered river next to Peter's Square. Cannon fire broke up the ice beneath them, and they drowned or froze. At least 1,271 people were killed. 903 of those were civilians. The consequences of the Decembrist uprising. Nicholas I ran the investigation of the Decembrists himself. There were 600 suspects. 121 suspects were put on trial. 5 were hanged. Many were sent into exile in Siberia or the Caucasus. The uprising justified the use of intense surveillance and police persecution for the rest of Nicholas I's reign. It was the only political revolt ever by Russian army officers. Nicholas I wiped out liberalism in the troops and secured total loyalty. And Nicholas I portrayed himself as a defender of order and a protector of the nation. But the people saw Nicholas I as a dark and sinister figure. Here's a cartoon of Nicholas I executing Polish revolutionaries in 1830. And in the cartoon, he's saying, "Gentlemen, I know that you wish to address me, but to spare you from delivering a pack of lies, I desire that you hold your tongues." The Holy Alliance lost some struggles. In 1830, the Holy Alliance couldn't control a French dynastic change. And in 1831, it couldn't stop Belgium from becoming independent of the Netherlands. And throughout the 1820s, it couldn't stop revolts from happening all over South America. This failure showed two things. Number one, that conservative control had its limits. And number two, that liberal ideas were eventually going to win.